Jewish Channel's Week in Review. More border clashes where Israel meets Syria, legislators speak out on U.S. Israel relations, and baking up new Jewish recipes. It's the Jewish news that's changing your world right now on this episode of the Week in Review. Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. Tension at Israel's border with Syria reached a new level last weekend, with perhaps more than 20 Arabs trying to cross the border shot dead by Israel Defense Forces. That follows the more than a dozen dead in similar attempts to cross the border on May 15th. Usually, the Syrian government tries to stop individuals from attempting to cross the border. But recently, the accusation made against the Syrian government is that it is provoking people to attempt a border crossing and create conflict with Israel to distract from the Syrian government's killing of civilians during protests in recent months. And one newspaper report suggests the Syrian government might not only be provoking citizens to demonstrate, but paying them to do so. A report in The Guardian mentions the May 15th demonstrations and states, one demonstrator who was wounded that day told The Guardian the Lebanese militia Hezbollah had given him $50 to turn up at the border and $900 to have his gunshot wounds treated by physicians. After the demonstrations this weekend, the Reform Party of Syria, which opposes the regime of Syrian President Bashar Assad, asserted that the government has offered demonstrators $1,000 to participate and $10,000 to the families of those demonstrators killed in the demonstrations. The United States agrees that Assad's government is behind those demonstrations, though not necessarily that payment is involved. State Department spokesperson Mark Toner said on Monday, "We do think this is an effort by the Syrian government to play a destabilizing role. This is clearly an attempt by Syria to incite these kinds of protests. Israel, like any sovereign nation, has a right to defend itself." White House spokesperson Jay Carney said at his Monday night briefing that the White House is, quote, strongly opposed to the Syrian government's involvement in inciting yesterday's protests in the Golan Heights. Such behavior is unacceptable and does not serve as a distraction from the Syrian government's ongoing repression of demonstrators in its own country. Part of the theme of Sunday's demonstrations was Noxaday, in which Israel's 1967 war and what Israel calls Yom Yerushalayim, or the Day of Jerusalem, is seen as a setback for Arabs and Palestinians. And while many Jews here in the United States were celebrating Yom Yerushalayim last week, one non-Jew was making waves for celebrating too. Former governor of Alaska and former Republican vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin famously visited New York City last week as part of her nationwide tour that's presumed to be testing the waters for a presidential candidacy. While she can often be seen wearing a necklace bearing a cross, her visit to New York had a different emblem hanging from her neck, that of the Star of David. Asked about her choice of jewelry, she responded, "Today is the 44th anniversary of Jerusalem being reunited. We want to call attention to that." But if you want to hear what politicians currently in office have to say about Israel, TJC has you covered. Here's Christian Eden's report on the Metropolitan Council on Jewish Poverty's recent legislative breakfast.
This past Sunday, the Grand Ballroom of the Roosevelt Hotel was awash with New York's political elite as the Met Council threw its annual legislative breakfast to thank elected officials from city, state, and federal government for their support. While Met Council President Joseph Shanker began the morning by highlighting two recent $50,000 grants to Met Council career services and community programs, the majority of their funding for programs like elder care still comes through public sources like Medicare. And several speakers brought up the funding politics around that program.
Met Council will be joining the Democrats in preserving Medicare as we know it. We will not allow deep subsidies to oil companies while they continue to cut the safety net that Met Council is dedicated to preserving and helping the needy in our great city.
We talk about providing help for the aged, education for the weak, to allow people to be able to have self-respect, self-esteem, to lead their families and communities and countries. It would seem to me that this is beyond the level of Democrats and Republicans and Tea Parties and liberals and conservatives.
There will definitely be tough choices ahead, and we may not always agree on some of the details. But when it comes to the work that you do here in New York to help those with the least, let me be clear, you have an ally and a friend in the White House.
We have poor people in this city who need help at a time when the government is cutting back federal, state, and city. Met Council is needed more than ever before, And thank God, Baruch Hashem, that there is a Met Council and that you're all here to support it in every way. So thank you.
To hear more from the Met Council breakfast, including what some of the gathered politicians had to say about U.S. support for Israel, please tune into the full broadcast edition of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Christian. Most of us don't host legislative breakfasts, but smaller affairs are common in the Jewish home. One cookbook author is trying to bring a new touch of class to everyday hosting by emphasizing a new approach to kosher baking.
This is the Chabad House on Lime Avenue in Seagate, Brooklyn. And these Jewish women have gathered in its kitchen to view a demonstration by kosher cookbook author Paula Scheuer, author of The Kosher Baker. But unlike other public demonstrations she's done over the past decade, Scheuer's introduction on this recent spring night has an unusually personal element.
So, welcome everybody to my grandmother's kitchen.
Yes, a house now associated with the Chabad Lubavitch movement used to be home to Scheuer's grandmother, who she counts as her own kosher baking inspiration.
This is the place where I first got to see how to make fabulous desserts. So my grandmother, Sylvia Altman, was a baking legend, both in Seagate and in Lake Worth, Florida, where she moved when she got older. And she wasn't modest about it either.
And before showing off her own cooking skills, Scheuer reminisced to the crowd about both her grandmother Sylvia and the kitchen where she baked with the quick pace of a professional chef.
And the kitchen ended, I think, here, and there was a little peninsula coming out. So this very kind of modern-looking kitchen used to be fuchsia pink and yellow. Okay, late 70s, so just try to picture that. But I think that was just part of her energy, that she just had, you know, that great sunny energy and decorated her kitchen to look the same.
Tapping into that energy, Scheuer donned a chef's coat bearing her grandmother's brooches and started cooking. While her book is all about kosher baking, this demo included more savory dishes, a light and healthy meal of soy maple seared salmon, salad with ginger cilantro dressing and avocado cream, and a cinnamon quinoa salad. But of course there was also dessert. To see how Scheuer layers up this chocolate ganache cake, tune into the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
That's all for this week. From all of us here at the Jewish Channel, be well. The Jewish Channel is available on cable: IO Optimum Cable Channel 291, Time Warner Cable Channel 528, RCN Channel 268, Verizon Fios Channel 900, and Cox Cable Channel 1. For more information, visit tjctv.com.